from the State of the American West. Thank you for joining us. I think you are going to discover that was a good move to come tonight. I've heard of sections of, I guess I haven't heard the lecture, but I've heard some remarkable and interesting comments here, and very spirited and very, very much, I guess it would be
weird.
Weird. I guess that was the word we just arrived at. I said anomaly. He said weird. So, okay, synonyms. So I would first like to thank our co-sponsors, the Boulder County Commissioners and the county staff. I would like to point out to you that FrackingSENSE is one part of a big project funded by the National Science Foundation Sustainability Research Network that is researching oil and gas development and hydraulic fracturing. And we do have a number of our team members here tonight. Who was raise your hand if you're on the SRNT. Wow, look at all that. Wow. There we are. Oh, yay. And they're young. Some of them are quite young, too, over there. That's especially promising. So, and I would also like to thank, because I often forget and go home feeling bad, I'd like to thank the State of the American West staff who put these events on and help us with all kinds of things. So Kurt, Emily, Ashley, and Chris, who are here tonight. Thank you, State of the American West staff, and board members, too. Now, this Thursday, on a rather different note, this coming Thursday, the artist Christo, who is also weird and anomalous. We have a theme going this week. Christo will be here speaking about his proposed land art project over the river at an event co-sponsored with other groups by the Senate of the American West as one co-sponsor, and he will be speaking this Thursday, October 17th at 6 p.m. in the UMC Glenn Miller Ballroom, and so do add that to your itinerary. Then, really important, please note that FrackingSENSE is not every Tuesday. So no one will be here next Tuesday, except the people who did not listen to me tonight, who might be a very festive and pleasant group. You might enjoy each other's company. It could be a discussion group. But then we'll be back here 2 weeks from tonight, where Will Fleckenstein, who's back there, will be our speaker, and he is from the School of Mines and a honcho in the petroleum studies world there, and also an experienced person with issues of well casing and well completion and well bore integrity, and a fine communicator. And then 3 weeks from tonight, Congresswoman Diana DeGette will be our speaker. Okay, I'll remind you that the operating theory of FrackingSENSE 2.0, as opposed to the first round of our series, for FrackingSENSE 2.0, we are openly inviting our speakers to offer evidence-based findings, recommendations, prescriptions, and so on at the end, and to anticipate a future that they think would be the right sort of future for us. And for the benefit of all of us, maybe especially for students, we are asking all our speakers to demonstrate how they weigh evidence, evaluate conflicting studies, and appraise contradictory claims. In other words, we are asking them to model critical thinking performed live. The framework for FrackingSENSE 2.0 virtually guarantees that all members of the audience, if they keep coming to this series, will have moments when a particular speaker says something that earns their hearty agreement, and all members of the audience will also have moments when a particular speaker says something that fills them with dismay and disappointment. So this range of opinion makes it even more important for all of us to abide by the recognition that people come to hear these talks, and we must do everything we can to make sure that the capacity to hear the speaker remains reliable and uninterrupted. If you do find yourself in deep disagreement with a spoken statement, we encourage you to use what the State of the American West has now designated as respiratory protest. You can and should sigh deeply and bitterly, and you can even hiss quietly if your feelings are very strong. At various center events, this practice has been tested, and exasperated sighing and light hissing are perfectly compatible with keeping the speaker's voice audible and her or his ideas accessible. You're okay with that? A little bit of respiration. Good.
Can I do the same?
Yes. And you'll have the
Sometimes
microphone.
I don't agree with what I say. So
Right. Well, that'll be so fun, an exasperated sigh from the speaker. That'll be too fun. And you'll be amplified, so we'll really get that. We will also stick by our custom of written questions, maybe especially tonight, since it seems certain that there will be lots and lots of questions. During the talk, people from the Senate of the American West will walk around the room collecting questions and delivering them to me. They will also carry more sheets around in case you were, I can't imagine for many people that just one sheet is going to be sufficient. They will bring those questions to me. I will sort them into categories of lightning speed and present them to the speaker. If you write them in a hostile tone, I will deliver them in a hostile tone. If you write them in an affectionate tone, I guess I would do that too. So, okay, so I will try the best I can to deliver the tone as well as the words of your message. Now, Apache Corporation. Our speaker is affiliated as an employee of Apache Corporation. It is a distinctive sort of company. I won't take long, but I just want to tell you that is a distinctive company, and it is that because its founder, Ray Plank, is a distinctive sort of person. Ray Plank is also the founder and funder of an artists institute outside Sheridan, Wyoming, the UCross Foundation, which is described as a creative mecca, a retreat that attracts some of the nation's most promising writers, visual artists, and musicians. Annie Proulx, for instance, did a lot of her work there. In 2006, the UCross Foundation hosted an exhibit of photographic art, and this exhibit was called The New Gold Rush, Images of Coal Bed Methane. Now, back when I invested time and trouble into stereotyping, I would not have seen this coming, that Ray Plank, founder of Apache Corporation, would establish an artist colony that would then create a not exactly flattering exhibit on the landscapes of oil and gas development. So I give you that background just to say that the fact that our speaker tonight, George King, is a distinctive human being, that fact is not entirely a surprise. He is currently Apache Corporation's Distinguished Engineering Advisor. He has, it saddened me to know that he apparently has not met Mr. Plank.
No. Okay.
But Mr. Plank created that company and set the spirit that lets this kind of wild person operate there. So I think there's connectivity and continuity there.
You've been talking to my wife.
I would enjoy that very much. I look forward to having a chance to chat with her. George King has degrees in chemistry, chemical engineering, and petroleum engineering from Oklahoma State University and the University of Tulsa. He has taught classes as an adjunct professor at the University of Tulsa, and I hope you will not consider this irreverent when I say that the subject matter of his courses might sound to the unsophisticated as if they originated in that passage and through the looking glass where Lewis Carroll describes the school of fishes where subjects like wheeling and riding are taught. That is to say that George King teaches classes on completions and workovers, terms which bring all sorts of interesting practices, say in physical therapy or wardrobe redesign or the closure of romantic relationships. Many of other ideas come to mind with those terms, but those terms actually have a lot to do with the process of drilling and well construction and enhancing production in particular wells. Okay, back to the point. George King has had 42 years of experience as an engineer in the oil and gas industry. He is the author of many articles and a very useful text available on the web called Hydraulic Fracturing 101, What Every Representative, Environmentalist, Regulator, Reporter, Investor, University Researcher, Neighbor, and Engineer should know about frac risk and improving frac performance in unconventional gas and oil wells. Mr. King begins that text with the recognition, quote, that there are no human endeavors without risk, and also with a declaration of the value he places on, quote, transparency on the oil and gas industry side, both to assist in the understanding of oil and gas activities and to set a foundation for rational discussion of fracturing risks. In Hydraulic Fracturing 101, he writes, quote, problem areas are purposely identified here not to vilify or glorify, but to help the public understand the risks and the steps that can be taken to reduce those risks. And at this point, the irony that I am standing here quoting from a man who could actually just be speaking directly to you has become very noticeable. And so I ask you to join me in welcoming George King, who will speak to us on hydraulic fracturing and well development. What are the factual risks? George King.
Thank you. You know, talking to an audience that's going to have people that are anti-fracturing and pro-fracturing in there is about like my friends Earl and Maud as they were going down the highway one night, and Earl was just going too fast. You know, he just always cruised right on the other edge of where the highway patrol is going to notice you. So pretty soon there was a party light in his rearview mirror. He pulled over. Cop walked up and said, sir, I clocked you doing 77 miles an hour back there in a 55. Earl said, I couldn't have possibly been doing that. I never drive over 50 miles an hour. Ethel's over on the other side. She looks over at him and says, Earl, you've been driving 90 most of the day. She just gives her a real callous look. And the cop says, and your taillight's busted, and I'm going to give you a ticket for that. And Earl said, I had no idea that taillight was busted. And Ethel's over there going, Earl, you've known it for 3 months and you just wouldn't fix it. And he started muttering under his breath. And the cop says, and you weren't wearing your seatbelt, and that's a big fine right there. And Earl says, no, I took it off right when you pulled me over. Ethel looked over at him and says, you never wear a seatbelt. Earl looked, would you just shut up? The cop kind of bends down, he looks through the window, and he says, ma'am, does he always talk to you like that? And Ethel looked up very sweetly and said, only when he's drunk. Now there's going to be some differences of opinion here, but I'm not going to tell you that we have never made a mistake out there, because one of my jobs with Amoco for 28 years, with BP for 9, and then with Apache later on for the last almost 5, has been that I get to do well postmortems, which would sound really unusual for a subject to teach. It could go right there with completions and workovers. And yeah, there's some problems out there. So I sat down, and with Apache's, they have a beautiful phrase they use to describe their activities. It's ready, fire, aim. And basically what it is hit the ground running, correct it as you go. So this gives you a lot of alternatives here in what we do. First, let me give you a little bit of history. Some of this will be disputed, but I'll explain it as we go through. The hydraulic fracturing was actually, the first patent on it was in about 43, 44, and by 47 they had done their famous field test out in the Hugoton field, and the guy that did that test, he is the one that actually hired me into Amoco in 1971. So I got to work with a bunch of characters from World War II and the Korean War. That was interesting. It was fully commercialized by 1954, and although the environmentalists try to make you think that the multi-fractured horizontal well is new, that actually the first one was done in 1975, and the first one in shale was done in 1988. So we've been doing them a while, but I will tell you that we are doing a lot more of them than we ever did before. So is it a new technology? No. It is actually very, very similar in the respect of actually pumping the jobs as what we've always done. In fact, some of the jobs are a little bit smaller on a per frac basis, but the entirety of doing one after another in the same wellbore, that is different. But we've been doing those for over 10 years now, and we've done almost 1 million jobs in that time. So we do have some pretty good experience. The 1 million pound sand jobs were in the 1970s, and the 1 million gallon fracs were done in sandstones in the 1980s. So when you look at this, there's a lot of history here too. Yes, we're doing some combinations of new technologies, but we're also seeing some real good opportunities here. Now, let's get some terms defined here, because I'm really kind of sick and tired of hearing fracturing described as a drilling method. And drilling is drilling, it just gets separated, or segregated and separated and then lumped in together too bad. All right, there's 5 things that we do. We assess it to see whether it's worth drilling, mostly seismic, outcrops, lab work. We do exploration, which is your initial drills, your initial well construction, etc. And what we're doing is identifying what cannot be assessed in the laboratory, plus we're learning as we go. There is still a lot of trial and error in this system, just like there is in medicine. And looking at that, actually the two fields have a lot of similarities. So I'll talk about some of those as we go through it. The main development, though, is what a lot of people have problems with, and this is the development, the construction, and the stimulation that can go on for months on a pad-type well. And I'll tell you some of the data behind that also some of the things that can actually cut down the problems. So this is something that I think would be very, very useful. Then the operations, now all this will be done in a few months to maybe 6 months, but this may go on for years. The beautiful part about the operations and production is if it's done right, you hardly ever know anything's going on. But there's still activity there. And so we have to be careful about what we're doing. We have to design a well for a certain life and then do the maintenance to make sure it lasts that long. The culture of maintenance, or the maintenance culture in a company, is one of those critical pieces of information that if you were going to lease your land to a company, you'd like to know how well they take care of their wells, how well they do the maintenance to make them last, to keep them from leaking. So those are the things I'll talk about tonight. In fact, I'm going to have 13 questions that if I was a landowner and was considering leasing, these would be 13 questions that I would ask the companies that were coming around. Because if they didn't have those in place, I wouldn't feel comfortable about leasing my land to them. But I'll show you those at the end of it. And then finally, the reclamation type thing here, we're looking at how do you restore the surface and make sure the old wells stay sealed. And we're talking about 100 years. Well, in the United States and Canada, there's been 4.3 million oil and gas wells drilled since they drilled that first shale gas well in 1825. It was all of 28 feet deep, by the way, and it flowed gas for 40 years. Or since Edwin Drake, and he wasn't really a colonel, but since Edwin Drake drilled his oil well in 1859, he hit flowing oil at 69.5 feet. Now, I kind of scratched my head. Both of these were in that southern New York, Pennsylvania area, but 28 feet and 69.5 feet, most water wells are deeper than that, and yet they didn't stimulate those wells, they just started flowing. So the gas and oil was there. That's an area of tremendous oil and gas seeps. It was actually chronicled in the 1600s and mapped by explorers that came up through there. So there are some areas that will have more problems than other areas, and it's very regional specific. We've got to know those things as we go along. Then you've all seen the pictures of well sites that were just spread out all over the landscape. All right, that's one of the red flags that comes up. And here is a pad. Now this is in the British Columbian forest. This is up north, and well, it's just on the border between British Columbia and Alberta, about as far north as you can go without getting into the territories. And this is a 6-acre pad. From this 6 acres, these wells, and these are the well houses right here, are drilled. There's 12 wells. This 6-acre pad accesses 6,000 acres of reserves underneath there. So can we actually shrink the footprint down? You bet we can. And these are some of the things that I hope to leave you with tonight, is a better way of doing it. Now, definitions. What I'm going to be primarily talking about are the pumping of a fracturing treatment, a little bit of the flow back in production and when water comes back, and also on a little bit of the storage areas. I did a paper about 2 years ago on estimating frac risk. And from that, I found that hydraulic fracturing, you're not going to fracture into the water supply. Not if you're in a well like 2,000 feet deep or deeper, and even shallower, I don't think it's going to happen. However, can fluids get into that water supply? That is up to the cement job, the pipe couplings, and surface spills. Those are the things we need to look at. We need to identify the real risks and rank them. Only then do you know what to work on to make it better. So that's the idea. These were some of the risks. Truck accidents on the hauling, transport, and storage. If you did have a problem during a fracture treatment, oftentimes it was a pipe break, but even that was rare. And then hauling waste, actually, there's where your risk goes up again. So there's some factors in here that, honestly, we need to take a serious look at. Now, When we started producing shale gas, that first shale well back in 1825, which was the Hart well, and it was near Fredonia, New York, actually lit the street lamps of that town for something like 40 years. And that, even then, was recovering only about 1% of the gas in place. These shales aren't new. We just didn't find them. We've known where these things are for probably 50 to 100 years. We've drilled through them. It will kick gas at you. It'll take care of it in the drilling bud, but it'll kick a little gas at you. But if you complete it, it would just die off and there wouldn't be anything to flow. So we had to develop a whole suite of technology that really kicked in here. The big things are high rate fracks, horizontal wells, slick water, and multi-stage fracks. And people look at these things and say, well, wait a minute, why are you putting so many wells in a horizontal? We take a horizontal down, we turn it, and we may go anywhere from 2,500 feet, a half a mile or so, out to maybe 2 or 3 miles. And we'll put anywhere between 15 to maybe 25. The record is over 52 fracks in that single well. But that single well has replaced 5 to over 10 vertical wells. That means that many less penetrations coming down through the water table, that many less areas that I have to worry about in terms of getting a seal. So when you look at this, and then I'll show you some history here in a minute, on well tests on 16,000 of these horizontal wells in Texas, no leaks. We haven't really had the problem subterranean. There's been some wellhead leaks. That's another thing we've got to look at. So we've done a lot of technology and we've changed the recovery of this gas in place is now somewhere in this 2013 era between about 10% up to about 35%, and we expect that to go on up as the research continues. Do we do a lot of research in laboratories? Yeah, we still do, mostly at the university levels. Some of the bigger companies have oil field research centers, but think about this. In the shales, in these unconventional reservoirs, there hasn't been a single shale, Barnett, Haynesville, Eagleford, the Marcellus, the Horn River, all of these things, not one of those was opened by a major company. Every one of them was done by independents. No research centers. No research centers at all in independents. A lot of trial and error, a lot of risk. A lot of people went broke. A few companies made a lot of money. Now the majors are moving into there, bringing with them a lot of the research potential behind it. So are we learning more about it? Sure we are. But those are the things that we're trying to push. Let's take a look at the wells, though, and then we're going to talk about fracks, and then we'll come back to wells. Normally, when a well is drilled, you'll have anywhere between 3 and up to 7 strings of casing with some type of cement coverage behind them. Pipe alone, good durable pipe, holds a lot of pressure, but the cement is what gives you the seal. Now, I'll show you some data in a little bit on how much cement you'll need to seal, and it'll surprise you how little it takes. But basically, we call each one of these pipe and cement sections a barrier. And wells are designed from the inside out. First thing we've got to know is how big the pipe needs to be at the bottom of that well, and everything else around it is built out from there. We design it from the inside out, from the bottom to the top. We build it from the top to the bottom and from the outside in. A little bit of a strange thing, but we learn a lot as we're doing it. However, what shakes out is this. What we're protecting, that's the hazard of us polluting something, our groundwater, and most of my talk is going to be about potential for polluting groundwater. That was the study area that I took off on. Is groundwater, other types of reserves, plus if we have corrosive salt water behind here, we're trying to keep it from damaging the pipe and maybe compromising the well integrity. And so basically when we have that, the higher the risk, the more of these barriers we have in there. Wells are built with multiple barriers, nested barriers from the inside out. You will generally have as few as 2 downhole, but sometimes as many as 4 to 7. It all depends on your barriers and your casing set points, which gets into drilling, which I'm going to leave that alone. So these are multiple barriers. It's like flying in an airplane when you know they have 3 different ways to navigate. They have 2 radios, sometimes 4 radios, and they have a couple of different radar units in. If one goes out, they simply switch to the other. The plane doesn't crash. Redundant systems. Same technique that we use here. All right? Now, looking at the fracture, and this is and by the way, all of this information are in a couple of different technical papers, which I put the numbers down here on the bottom, and at the end, I show you where you can get those, where you can get that data from. But all of the data and all of the graphics are in there. I took 20 outcomes, and I realized there are over 200 outcomes that possibly could happen from a hydraulic fracturing job. I had to cut it to a reasonable number, and so I took the ones that had a possibility actually of happening, just from my experience. I found 20 outcomes here, and it deals with seismic, it deals with splitting the pipe, it deals with fracturing to the surface, getting into the groundwater, etc. But the single digits up here from 1 to 9 are transport and storage. That's what happens on the surface. 10 to 20 is what could happen underground. And, 10 to 19 is what could happen underground. I took a stab at emissions. I'm not going to say much about it unless I get a question. Then I've got a couple of slides to address it. What we're after here is 100% of the time having a normal frac operation with no problems. Are there problems? Rarely. I've been out on 550 shale fracs, either designed them, pumped them, evaluated them, etc. in the last 5 years. And had a lot of good things happen on those fracs, made well almost every time, didn't have any kind of pollution off those things, which is good. But how often does it happen? So I had to dig into a lot of literature. What I did is I took this Boston Squares approach. Up here, this is where I never want to be. Even when you have an accident, I want a fail-safe in there that will keep us out of that red zone. That red zone being defined as the worst is up here, permanent damage to an aquifer or to the surface, like acid mine drainage. And those of you who have been up in Pennsylvania, you understand about acid mine drainage. It just literally poisons some of the creeks and some of the areas up there. Now, let's work our way down here, and basically where I thought was acceptable in a very, very remote occurrence of happening were things like a spill or leak of non-toxic persistent chemical, something like spreading salt on an icy road. That doesn't sound like much, but we do a lot of damage to our environment by spreading salt. I don't want to compare myself to the worst and say, oh, look how good I am. I'd like to compare myself to the best and say, well, that's where I want to be, even if I'm not there. So putting those into perspective, what you find is to make that better, you need to move this down in terms of impact and over to the left in terms of occurrence. I want to get these things into this 1 in 10 million, 1 in 1 million range. Remember, we've already fracked about 2 million total wells, or about 2 million frac stages here. So, first off, let's address a couple of issues about maybe fracturing up. How far does a fracture go up? Typically, an effective prop fracture is not going to go much about 300 feet. That's about as far as we can get it to go. We'd love for it to go a little further. Then we drill less wells. But this is microseismic, and a microseismic, all this microseismic, which there's 3,800 fracs in 4 different shales recorded here, this is the depth of the well itself. This is the height that we measured a seismic signal above it. That doesn't mean fluid got up that far, but it means the rock was stressed enough to make that little jump here. Okay? So we looked at that, and the closest we got, this is Marcellus, this is Barnett. These are the number of data points in each one of these, and this is about 2-year-old data. This has gone up to about 9,000 points now. And when you look at the depth of the pay zone, this is the depth of the fresh water. And the difference between the deepest fresh water and the pay zone was running anywhere from 7,000 feet down to the minimum was about a half a mile. I've never seen a frack that went into the water zone via a frack. Quick question?
Yeah, is it okay to ask what a frack is?
Gee, I got way ahead of it. All right, a fracture treatment, thank you. A fracture treatment, basically what we're doing is we have a rock down here at whatever our pay zone is, and the pay zones have been as shallow as 600 feet, which we don't frack. But the primary ones are 2,500 feet down to the deepest I fracked has been 17,000 feet. All right, now that's rock, highly stressed. It's got gas or oil, sometimes nothing more than salt water in it. I drilled a well down through there, got it all cemented and buckled up. I'm going to put water with a friction reducer, a biocide, maybe a scale inhibitor, and typically that's about it. Sometimes I'll use a little bit more than that, but those are the chemicals, pretty minor amount of chemicals most of the time. I'm going to load that hole with water, and then I'm going to pressure up at the surface. All right, think of it this way. If you took a glass pop bottle and you fill that up to where the meniscus comes up over the top, if you could get somebody silly enough to hold that bottle and then slap their hand down on that real hard, that pressure from that incompressible fluid would likely break the bottle. That's what we're trying to do with the formation. Is we're trying to generate enough pressure for that formation to break, and with stresses being what they are down there, it will break vertically, and it pulls it apart a little bit. In fact, I'm going to show you a downhole television camera in a moment or two of what that frack will look like, and it will be 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch wide, and it can climb a few hundred feet, and it can go outward, but it's stopped from growing by a couple of different things. Let me get to that to cover it. But basically what we're doing, we're loading that hole up with water, we're putting enough pressure on it to break it, and then we're pumping some more to get that crack to go through the rock.
So one frack is one pressure change.
One frack is about 2 hours worth of pumping into the rock.
Okay, thank you.
And if you want to get more detailed, I teach a 2-day school on this that you're welcome to come to. All right,
Just one.
that's your frack right there.
Okay, thank you.
And this is at 4,500 feet. This was a camera, a side-looking camera that Amoco developed in the 1960s. So these have been around a while. You've got to fill the hole with clear fluid, but you could actually, in an open hole, you could see the hydraulic fraction. Usually, these things are limited by either natural formation barriers, and there's some rock that we can't fracture, which is good because you'll find some of that in there. That stops your upward growth of fracture and the downward growth if you're lucky enough to have it there. We want to keep the frack in zone because anytime it goes out of the zone, we're wasting money and horsepower. And every one of these frack stages, the cheapest ones cost about $100,000, and the more expensive ones cost about $250,000. We want to keep it in zone because only if we keep that frack in zone do we get the maximum amount of monetary return from the oil and gas that's produced. All right. The stresses in the rock can also limit it, as does the leak off, because all rock is permeable. I mean, right now the concrete in the floor here, not the wood under my feet, but the concrete under yours, that is 100 times more permeable or able to transmit fluid through it than some of the shales that we are fracturing. We have to have a large surface area of contact, and then it just seeps out small amounts, but a small amount over 1 million square feet of contact area will be enough to get pretty good flow. But it works both ways. As you're pumping, even at 100 barrels per minute, which sounds like a lot, I mean, that's 4,200 gallons a minute. Well, when you look at that, but all of that surface area is open, you ever take a bucket of water, walk up on the beach about 20 yards from the shore or from the ocean, pour that bucket on the beach, how much of it runs down to the ocean if all that's sand? It just goes right in the sand. Same thing happens in a well. You're pumping like crazy, but fluid is leaking off as well. And after a while, you'll get to a point that says, there's enough fluid loss to where, yeah, you can pump 100 barrels a minute, but all you're doing is putting water through the rock. You're not creating any more fraction. So that's kind of what we look at here. And it's all about economics. Now, in terms of cement, I'm going to build a well. First thing I'm going to drill is I'm going to have a pipe called a conductor pipe. From the surface, goes down to the bottom of where the loose rock and the soil is. All that's for is to keep loose rock and soil out of the well while you're drilling it. All right, so I'll put that in there, fill in around it, make it a ready mix truck, pour around it. Then I'll start drilling the well. And the first well, first big hole that's drilled, maybe this big around, goes down past the fresh water. And I don't want to go much more than about 200 feet below the fresh water. People are saying, well, why don't you take it deep? Because if I go deeper, you won't run into salt water pretty quickly. Now, if I have salt water and fresh water, and the cement job somehow goes wrong, I have flow behind the pipe, and I'll be polluting my freshwater zone. So I drill that, I cement it, and before I can drill one more inch, I've got to test it. If it will not pass the pressure test, I've got to do it again. And about 5% of our jobs don't do that. And when that happens, cement goes from being about a 3% of the well cost up to about a 15 or 16% of the well cost. So we really like to get that cement job done right the first time. All right, then out of a hole that big, and the casing is this big, you drill a hole this big, you run a little bit smaller casing into it, then you take a bit that's a little bit smaller than that, you drill out to another depth, then you take a casing a little bit smaller than that, you run into it, you cement it, then you take another bit that's a little bit smaller than that. See what I'm doing? I'm just working my way down. It's kind of like the old expandable car antennas. I see some gray hair out there, so you know what those antennas are. See, on a Saturday night when you really wanted to cruise and listen to that old AM radio, you had to go out there and literally pull that antenna up by hand after you got the car out of the garage. Because if you, well, okay, you just had a bent antenna if you didn't. Yeah, you're laughing, you've done it too. Okay, that is what a well looks like, only in reverse, and goes down. So it's sealed well as it goes in. All right, now, how much cement do you need? This has never been published, but it's some stuff that Amoco did, and we were looking at well failures where the isolation was breaking down. Now, these were in two areas. One was Matagorda, which is offshore Gulf of Mexico. The other was Tuscaloosa, which is right in the middle of Louisiana, not too far from Baton Rouge. All right, so these wells were extremely high pressure, and between the individual zones, and there were several in the well, they could have 10,000 PSI differential pressure. And you're going, fantastic, how much cement do you need for that? Well, 10 feet wouldn't do it, but when they got out to at least 50 feet, they had no more failures. And this is what we looked at. Basically, we said, okay, if 50 feet of good cement will do it, we're going to pump from 200 to 600 feet of cement, just in case we've got a bad spot in it. It's not all perfect, but it has to pass that pressure test. And that's absolutely critical that we get the isolation. Now, I want to take you back in time a little bit. I took you back into 1825 and to 1859 when the first gas and the oil wells were drilled. But I talked about cement and how that isolates the strength. The first cement job was not used on a well until 1903. By that time, there had been over 200,000 wells drilled. Most of them, thank goodness, in Pennsylvania, because that was the oil center of the world at one time. And it went from being a nuisance to a valuable commodity. You know, the hundreds of farmers drilling a water well get oil, and they're just cussing about it. Okay, now, had a lot of pollution potential because the casing wasn't cemented. It was drilled with a cable tool, which is kind of like a big chisel on a string. And basically the Chinese use this in about 3000 BC, and they use a tree branch and a rope and some kind of a metal chisel, And they just let that thing bang up and down, and you could drill with that. That's called cable tool drilling. Trouble is, that whole well bore is empty. And they were drilling for salt, by the way. Salt water. Salt's a valuable commodity. Used to pay the Roman soldiers in it. Anyway, not China anyway. But basically, that cable tool drilling is the one that allowed, when you hit a flowable oil zone, it would blow to the surface with a lot of gas behind it. That's the old pictures of blowing over the crown block on the rig. And basically, when we see that anywhere today, we cringe. Something really screwed up when that happened. Now, time periods. That was a period of very, very high pollution. And what happened later? Cementing came in the 1916 era, and basically that continued on to about the 1970s, where we really got good cement jobs by that time. By the 1930s, we had blowout preventers and rotary drilling. Now we had pressure control on the well. You didn't see so many blowouts anymore. A lot less pollution. Worked down. Actually, and this is kind of the odd one, when fracturing was invented, we actually lowered the amount of environmental impact, because then you had to put better steel in your pipe and more cement in your well to control the frac pressure. That assisted us on long term. Then as you went through, and you can see these things, we are changing with technology. The era of pollution potential gets lower and lower. Now, my point in showing you this is, when you see well failures from a scientific basis should be compared to other wells of the same era, because that described what technology was available at the time. All right, doesn't excuse the old behavior, but at the same time, there were companies back here in the 30s that were drilling wells that are still producing today. They do not leak. So there were people back then doing it right. That's what we're after. Now, I did a study, and this subset is just in the U.S. I actually had over 650,000 wells, studies covering that many, and pulled down for the ones in the U.S., primarily looking at Ohio and Texas, which had the best records of old wells, integrity failure, and barrier failure. Now, a barrier, let me define something here. I said that multiple barriers as you go out, steel and cement. That's the way a well is made. If one of those barriers fail and the next barrier catches it, you're doing fine. That's like double bagging that rotten piece of meat that you're going to throw in the trash can. You know, one bag might be enough, but then again, if it broke, you got a real mess. So basically, we put multiple barriers. If it doesn't go through the actual multiple barriers, it doesn't go through all of them, you don't have a leak path. Now, you have a leak in that barrier. What's that tell you? It tells you something is wrong with that barrier, which better influence the way that you design and construct wells for the next time. And it's a learning step. A learning step that we haven't always embraced, because we like to do things like we've always done. You got to change in order to improve. That's where we had to go to. Okay, but look at this. Old Ohio wells, the percentage of the barriers that were failing, single barriers, about 0.1%, sometimes a little higher, sometimes a little lower. That's what it averaged out for about 64,000 wells in that particular study. All right? But in the newer wells, they had considerably less problems here. And this was a barrier failure, and this is what we call a well integrity failure. That's where all of the barriers fail, and you got a leak. Now, to have pollution, you got to have three things. You have got to have a leak path that goes through all of the barriers. If one barrier holds, you don't have a leak path, and you will not have pollution. Now, people talk about, oh, you've got a 6 to 60% failure rate in the Gulf. They're all leaking. No, you got some barrier failure rates. And I'll show you some data on that in a minute. But that barrier can leak. So you got to have a well path, or a flow path, a leak path to get through. Second is you have to have pressure in the well higher than on the outside. Now, the one thing that saves us a lot of problems in the oil industry, we drill a well, we fracture the well, we start producing the well. What happens to the pressure in the formation? It goes down. And pretty soon, your pressure in the formation and in that well bore is considerably lower than the hydrostatic gradient of the salt water on the outside. So where, if you did get a leak path, where's the leak going to be? It's going to be into the well, and it's going to be salt water. We don't want that happening either, because that costs us a lot of money, and corrosion and lift. So that's something we need to fix. Third thing is if you do have a leak path, and I do have pressure that forces it out there, you have to go from high pressure to low pressure to get a leak. But if I do get all that done, you have to have some evidence that something actually leaked. And in many of these cases, we simply don't see it. Okay? Give you some examples of that in a moment here. So we're looking at things that these things have kept the real integrity that failure's low. Integrity is where all the barriers leak. Barrier failure is where one leaks and the next one out says, I got it. But the next time you repair that well, you better be looking at why it leaked. All right, so a lot of these things will help us. Now, what proof? Look at the occurrence of ranking of proven groundwater pollutants. Most anti-fracturing activists look, they start at a position that says, you polluted the groundwater. Wait a minute, show me where we polluted the groundwater. They'll show you some methane migration, and some of that is our fault. Most of it is not. More on that later. But look at the rankings of proven groundwater pollutants. All right, EPA data, year 2000. Unfortunately, it's the last time they collected this data on the various types of pollutants. Underground storage tanks, gas and diesel, that's your local convenience store and filling station. They started putting underground steel tanks in back in the 30s and 40s, and those things have been leaking ever since. Under about 1984, they came in and said, we're going to start pulling these things out. We're seeing huge amounts of gasoline and diesel in the shallow water supplies. Started pulling them out, remediating those sites. The last thing in the world you wanted to do was to buy an old filling station because you had a cleanup problem from day one. Okay? Then you got down to, oh, this is going to be nice. How many of you are on well water? Septic systems are your second biggest one. Landfills, spills of various types, fertilizer, large industrial facility, hazardous waste sites, and animal feedlots. If you notice here, a lot of these are agriculture oriented. The shallow injection wells down here, I actually tracked some of those back, and that's mostly of Class 1 injection wells that were very shallow. Class 1 is the real toxic materials, much of which they've actually stopped from injection. Class 2 was the oil and gas salt water that was coming out of producing. All right, that's deeper generally. But we didn't have gas and oil wells on any of the top 20, and you say, okay, well that's 13 years old. This is before the shale started. So, okay, I'm going to back up. I took the state of Texas, did a study this last winter. They have 250,000 producing wells, and over 1 million wells have been drilled in Texas since 1866. There also have been well over 500,000 frac jobs in the state. Now, 90 to 95% of Texas is underlain by major and minor aquifers. Texas is the #2 state behind California in groundwater withdrawals, and 85% of the water that comes out of there is used for municipalities, electrical generation, and agriculture. Agriculture is your big one there, dry land farming. Now, I looked at this and I had it overlaid here with gas wells, oil wells, and overlapping oil and gas wells. And you can see the dark green here are the areas up in here, and then you've got the yellow one here. Here is West Texas and the Permian Basin, and then all over South Texas. This is where I live, right in here. All right, so all over there, there's oil and gas wells literally all over the place. Now, if those are leaking in a large number, you're going to see that in the water, because remember, 85% is used for oil, or used for municipalities or farming. You got toxic chemicals or salt water coming up there, you're going to know it pretty quick. The interesting thing here is we just don't see that many. Now, do we have a problem? Yep, we've got some salt plumes created by injection wells where the operator did not do his job. And that indirectly comes back to we didn't check it good enough, or the regulators did. So that's an industry failure. But the pollution potential up here from oil and gas wells, very, very low, and actually the total pollution was low. Now, I took that and I pulled data from 11 years, all the data I could find, and I put three up here, the year 2000, 2006, and 2011. The top is still gasoline and diesel from underground storage, and that's where a lot of your benzene and BTX comes from as well. But as this comes down, this was 2000, 2006, and 2011, we're seeing a good cleanup of that because there's an actual focused effort to clean those things up. It works, all right? But still, when you look at this, chlorinated solvents are still up there. We've got some oil being hauled. We've got a lot of materials that are coming in from farming, and we've got toxic metals in here that are coming in from various manufacturing sites. Not a lot of pollution, and it's been declining in most cases. We're making headway on it. There's no oil and gas wells up here. Those are top 20 again over an 11-year period. This is why all of those shales are going on. That's the Barnett. That's the Haynesville. That's the Eagle Ford. That is West Texas, East Texas, South Texas. All right, we're just not seeing the pollution. Now, where do you see the pollution when you have something like that? Basically, what I did was I went back and I separated those cases where we did have some pollution. And these were the new complaints, again, over that time period. And the ones that say underground petroleum storage tank, now that's your gasoline and diesel again. But the TRC is the Texas Railroad Commission. Now, how the Railroad Commission was put in charge of oil and gas wells, I don't know. But that's just part of the game. All right? I separated those things out, tracked them down pretty carefully, tried to tie them back to either a well, a pipeline, or a surface facility. And that data is out there. I mean, you can download it right off the internet. And you could locate those things back. I used worst possible case. If I couldn't figure out where it was, if it was salt water, I said it was an injection well. If it was oil, it was an oil well. If it was gas, which you don't see very much of, then it was a gas well. Put that down here. Well, look, I've got these three symbols. That barely makes it off the line, if it makes it off the line at all. In other words, about zero. Where was the problem? Old compressor sites, tank batteries, truck loading terminals. It was locations of about 1 to 2 acres that they had spilled stuff on and never cleaned it up. And so now it's got down into this impacted area. Well, they didn't even pay attention to it about 10 years ago. Now they're cleaning those up. Is it wells? Probably not. Is it some of the other activities? We've got some stuff to work on. Okay? Now, from that, I looked around and said, okay, what are your failure factors that I can recognize? And basically what that is wells that have a high amount of temperature fluctuation or that have very, very high pressures. Fire floods, cyclic steam, high pressure, high temperature wells, corrosive exterior fluids or a high compaction zone, those are the ones that I found failures in, time after time. Even then, because of the barrier system, most of them didn't leak, but they had barrier failures, which that's an indication that, okay, I'm going to have some problems if I don't fix this. But down here, this was the interesting part. The newer wells, especially the horizontal multi-frac wells, And I've got to back up and say that every state that I know of has really closed down on the regulations for building a well. Every state west of the Mississippi had already done it, and they continued to make it stronger. And Pennsylvania finally woke up and decided they had to do something about it and change their whole scheme. So right now, the states are doing a very good job of regulating with the rules. Big problem? Not enough regulators. Not enough regulators. And we have pressed the Texas, I've testified before the House Committee of the Texas, the Energy Committee of the Texas State House, which I'm always reminded that the old Texas proverb that no one's life, liberty, or property are safe as long as the Texas legislature is in session. But anyway, I reviewed their rules for them, went up, reported on it, and with a lot of industry effort, they really tightened them up again, and they tighten them up about every 10 to 15 years. But what you find, I went to the Gulf of Mexico, pulled down a bunch of wells, looked at the leak rate from 1980 through 2009. Now you notice 2010 isn't up there because Macondo was up there. But I'll talk about it in a moment. That wasn't a production well. It was going to be, didn't quite make it that far. Well, it didn't produce the oil into the right place, I'll put it that way. All right, but from 1980 through 2009, and if you lose a gallon of diesel or a gallon of oil onto the water, you will have a sheen, and you better report it, because the Coast Guard will be looking. So these leak rates are actually something that is a pretty hard number. I put that as a function of the amount of oil that was actually produced, which is fairly high. This is the leak rate in percent. That's 5/10,000ths of 1% escaped from a well. That could have been an open valve, it could have been a split pipe. But 5/100,000ths of 1%, this one is 3/10,000ths of 1%. We're just literally not seeing a lot of oil put in. And you say, well, any oil is bad. Okay, that's true, except for the natural seeps. And the natural seeps, there's over 300 of them in the Gulf of Mexico, and with 1,100 onshore, oil and gas. 1/4 of the volume lost in the Macondo well flows into the Gulf of Mexico every single year and has for centuries. I'll show you a little bit of data on that in a minute. But right now, let's look at gas migration. This is the big issue. If an old well was not completed correctly and a lot of these high pressure zones were left uncemented, that gas would come up the backside and break around and get into either deep water or shallow water. Well, that's mostly in Pennsylvania. That's where almost all of this has happened. Pennsylvania didn't hardly have any rules on construction. You could sink a 7,000-foot casing string into that well and only have to cement the bottom 500 feet. It was a disaster waiting to happen. And it happened. So that was a problem that we get into. Where are you going to see these natural seeps? Or where are you going to see the methane migration? Where you have natural seeps of oil and gas, you have poor regulations on water wells, or you have poor regulations on oil and gas well construction. There's a lot of other factors here. Where don't you? You got strong water well regulations, you got strong oil and gas construction regulations. How many water wells are there in the United States? It's over 15 million active water wells in the United States. Who knows how many have been drilled and just walked off from? Okay? So is there a possibility that surface fluids can get down those holes and into the freshwater supplies? Absolutely. And that's one of the biggest problems that we probably have is old water wells and old oil wells that have not been properly abandoned. In the state of Pennsylvania alone, they've got between 200,000 and 300,000 old wells. They're capping them as quickly as they can, but they probably got 50,000 or more that they don't even know where they are. Now, where do you find those? You start drilling with high pressure air, and that air goes through the shallow water, and you got geysers all over the place. I spent a day in a helicopter flying up and down the valleys and hills of Pennsylvania, and got off of it and told the boss, hey, let's not drill here. And we pulled out. All right, seepage, a few more slides left. All right, and basically these are the natural seeps that have been mapped out by seep experts in the United States. In other words, gas is coming to the surface. Well, guess what? You put that over here on a well density map, you got the same plot. We drill where the gas and the oil is. So yeah, we're going to have wells in that area. Now, this is the comparison of seeps. The worst one, Lakeview Gusher, notice the date, 1910. This is a drilling incident. Most of these are either drilling or transport. I put the Kuwait sabotage in here. This is the barrels. It's a logarithmic scale with 1,000 barrels here and 10 million barrels on this axis. And this is the Macondo. But here is the natural seeps into the Gulf of Mexico every year, and this is the Coal Point seep in California. All right? Big, big volumes flow in, natural seeps. Well, where does all that oil go? Same place the oil in Macondo went 12 weeks after they plugged and abandoned that well finally and got a cap. The newspaper article come out and said, where's the oil? Well, we've been training bacteria to eat this for generations and centuries. It did a real good job of it. It just got overwhelmed, which is one thing. You don't want to put oil in the water in any case, but the natural seeps put a lot of oil in there anyway. Now, this is the water. These are some of the other things that we deal with. Now, 4 to 5 million gallons of water. This is about how much you get back. This is your typical percentage of salt water that the operator is now using to displace fresh water. We found that salt water actually is a better fracturing fluid than fresh water. And if we could get enough salt water, we'd be fracturing with pure salt water. We would not use fresh water. The problem is, we can't get enough salt water. So it's a transport issue. There's plenty of it, but not the place we need it. So we're working on this one, but we're using a lot more salt water in the industry. This is the water usage, and natural gas always comes out. Now this is a misleading chart, because this is the volume of water, the liters of water per 1,000 kilowatts of power generation. All right, that's fine until you realize that when we use water in the oil industry, if we use fresh, it's consumed. It goes down. It doesn't go back into the atmosphere. You can't, by law, release that fluid on the ground or into a river. You can't do it. And for a while, they were doing it in some areas. Okay, water's produced from shale. These are that 35,000 to 50,000. You put that in a shale area, we'll take all you can give us, and we will make frac fluid out of it. So that is something that's happening. Now, the water rate, people worry a lot about it, but it declines rapidly in the first 5 to 15 days, falls rapidly, and then just goes into the background here, which may be a few barrels of water a day out of a well. So we get back almost all of that water quickly. That helps us with what we do. Where does the produced water go? Oil field brines, you can't release it at the surface. We don't want to inject any more of it than we have to. Now, we talk about seismic operations. That's where the problems have been, is injecting salt water for disposal wells. Well, we've got 150,000 saltwater disposal wells in this country. 150,000. About 20 of them have been suspected of causing very minor earthquakes. But you cause even one minor earthquake, people are going to get irritated at you. What are the 3 biggest causes for earthquakes? Man-made earthquakes? Dams and reservoirs backed up behind it, strip mining, and injection into the substrata in order. So we do cause earthquakes. Now, we don't burn up all of that. Look at the molecule here, methane molecule. 1 carbon, 4 hydrogens. When that is burned, you get water, along with CO2. And if you calculate that, 1 BCF of gas, and shale wells typically produce anywhere from 1 to 10 BCF in their lifetime, Every BCF of gas gives you 11 million gallons of fresh water back in vapor. And you say, well, that's no good. You took it away from where it was. Same thing with corn, same thing with any kind of water usage. We may consume it on one end, but we make it on the other. Now, we've talked right now about a lot of risk. And what we're trying to get across to people, whether you agree with what I've said or not, is that every action that man can come up with and that nature can come up with, there's some risk involved. And we know what's acceptable, and we learn by trial and error getting this thing down, but we can't bring it out until we've got a professional acceptance. Our target level is always 0. We can't get there. Nobody can. I mean, 500,000 people die every year just getting out of bed, which is a good argument to stay in bed and sleep a little bit longer, but watch yourself. It's still a risk. Now, I've talked to here, I want to shoot at some regulations, and there's several regulations out there. You've got people that are trying to make it better, and this encourages companies to get better at what they do. They set standards. What we want to see is consistent operations by all operators. We don't want any cowboys out there. We don't want any people who do something in the middle of the night and run like crazy the next day. Get it to a consistent operation. We want to use produced water instead of dispose of it or use fresh. We're going to address the chemical concerns, provide a level field, report all fracks out here on this Frack Focus site. And I listened to Dr. Goldstein and his presentation. He was talking about his inability to search Frack Focus. Well, you can do it because it's on SkyTruth. They broke that thing down. You can download that, but you need a data file manipulator because year by year, that's over 1 million data points in there. So just be aware of what can happen. Now, development preventers, every well a target for environmental impact and endless public challenge. So that'll shut us down. But there's no development around there. Unachievable goals are to make companies prove a negative endlessly. That gets expensive. And of course the slowdown, which companies said, people said, well, slow down. Let's wait till somebody else figures it out. And I'm going back to the medical industry going, we do 600,000 knee replacements a year. Who wanted to be the first? Okay? We learned by trial and error. Medical profession, oil industry. Both learned by trial and error. I don't know how many people we crippled getting that first knee replacement done. They do a lot of them now. Okay? Here's what I like to see. Chemicals in fracturing. Few as possible, and if I've got a deal like ultraviolet light that would replace glutaraldehyde, we're testing that, guys. That gets rid of chemicals in there. That's one less toxin in that whole thing. By the way, friction reducers, this is your big one. That's the absorbent in baby diapers. And it's also used as a flocculant in drinking water preparation. We've got some good experience with that. Now, gellants like guar and cellulose, the soup companies were really mad at us because we used so much guar that the price went up. And the Campbells and such were quite honestly mad. It's food grade additive. A lot of what we use is. Now, is everything a food grade additive? No. I'll tell you how to spot that. I'll tell you how to get around it. These are questions that I would ask. I've got property. All right, I'm going to lease that out, or I want to lease it out, or I'm considering leasing it out, or my neighbor's going to lease something out. These are questions that I'd ask. I've been in this business 42 years. I've done a lot of well postmortems, and I've seen some messes made. These are the things I'd ask. Does a company have an adequate maintenance culture? If they're known as a fly-by-night operator, I don't want them in there. All right, will all chemicals and water volumes be on Frack Focus? Now you can search that, go to SkyTruth, and you can download the files. Minimum distance between designated type of fracture and deepest fresh water. All I'm saying, guys, is I'm not going to fracture a shallow well. I don't think I could drive a fracture to the surface. I tested them at 900 feet, and I didn't. But I didn't put a lot of power in there either. I was doing some downhole television camera work and just doing breakdown pressures with fresh water. All right, so that's some of the things that I look for. Will a green completion be used? These are the ones that don't vent methane to the atmosphere during cleanup. And by the way, all these slides will be available. You don't have to break your pencils. All right. Can multi-well pads be used? This is that 6-acre pad that drains 6,000 acres. Reduce the environmental footprint over single wells by 93%. And cut emissions at the same time because it got the trucks off the road. Is it possible to limit busy development activity to a certain season, time, or remote area? In the Horn River, we did all of our fracturing at minus 20 degrees between Christmas and the middle of April. All of it. And that was 276 fracks on one pad and 154 on another. You can do it. All right. Continue. Basic well site evaluation. Abandoned wells, seeps, mines, etc. Get your problem areas out in the open. If you have to, just walk off from that site. There's areas you don't want to drill. There's areas that shouldn't be drilled. Methane migration potential. Geologic regions. This describes it pretty well. Test your freshwater wells out, but I'll warn you that one test is not going to be adequate because water changes underground over the course of a year. Recharge rate, pollution potential from septic systems and other shallow polluters. There's a lot of things that happen. We need universities that will go out and do a water map for us and keep it up. All right? Quick lay pipelines, get rid of truck traffic. We look at a well and we think, okay, I've got a 5,000 foot long well, I'm going to put 10 to 15 fracks in that. How many truckloads is that going to take? Would you believe 1,000 semi-truckloads of water, sand, equipment, and waste going out? 1,000 truckloads. And then I got to thinking, how many vehicles is that? Well, take a large grade school, and that's one day's traffic of all these women coming in to drop their kids off and then going to take them home. Yeah, get around the school, and especially down there in Texas where nobody walks. That's a tough one. Is water sustainability a consideration? Well, it better be if you're going to be in here for very long. That's why I like the recycled water. We've always got a lot of produced water. We just need to use it correctly. Surface water and salt water. That's what I like to see. And will recycled water be used? And that's great. Final one, you know, you've seen the problem with getting your chemicals reported because somebody says, oh, my product is proprietary. I don't want to disclose that. Simple way around it, Apache found it. You go to our website, you will see a list of the chemicals that we will not allow to be pumped. Our production chemist went to the Design for Environment site from the EPA. He went to the gold band chemicals that are allowed in the North Sea. Now these are chemicals that can be dumped overboard at the end of a frac, and they have been researched. They do not harm the environment because that's a big fishing area up there. All right? We've got a list on our website that says this are the ones we won't pump. Somebody comes up and says, hey, we've got this great product. You could probably use this in your well, and it would really help you. We hand them a list that any of the products that are on here, if they're on your special product that you won't tell us the name of, don't pump them. You have to have a signed deal from the company. All right? So that is some of the things that we see. Now, most of our transport problems, the leak rates are honestly low. We just don't see a lot of them. And the considerations here, I realize I'm a little bit over time, I apologize for that. We don't see much groundwater pollution from producing wells nor from fracks. We just don't see it. I know it's assumed, I know people say they have it. There's some methane migration out there in Pennsylvania. A little bit of it in southern Colorado, but they've had gas from the water wells in both locations for over 200 years. No. So there's some things here that we're not perfect, but we're not all that bad in some cases either. Failure of wells, though, should be a specific time era. They're artifacts of that era. They're not really reflective of the wells that are completed today. And this one I've covered, and improperly plugged old water wells and oil wells, gas wells, etc. may be conduit for methane migration. Your state needs to have an orphan well plugging fund. The state of Texas does. It's paid for by taxes on the operators. And they plug about 1,400 of those a year. Companies walked off, or hey, I found this old well that wasn't on the records. That comes on their heading. They categorize those, they rank them for pollution potential, and they plug them every year. So that is the basics behind what I have. All of this, 1, 3, 3, 4, 5, 6 is 30 years of gas shale fracturing. What have we learned? This is the estimation of fracture risk. This is the estimation of well construction risk. And that's all available on this onepetro.org. And it's a download site. You can download up to 60,000 papers on there. There is a charge for the paper, like all of your scientific deals are. But the other one that I put most of my presentations on, man, I haven't used a chalkboard in a long time, is a website. It's www.gekengineering.com, and go to the downloads tab. And you'll find about 160 teaching files and basic information files. And this presentation will be out there along with several others on cementing wells and the use of cement bond logs, etc. So that's what, that's how I get the information out. And you'll find a lot of reports out here that I do, you know, on a patchy time, and they say we don't have room for them on our website, stick them out on yours. And it works pretty well, but we get some information out there. Okay, that's it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Okay, I have some questions over here on practices. And so I'll just start off with this one. What percentage of wells built today in the U.S. are built with adequate materials?
Well, with the regulations we have today and have had since about 2010, 2011, I'd say we'd be bumping 100%. I'm not going to say it's perfect because some people are still using used casing and old threads. It still has to pass a pressure test. I wouldn't buy the well from them when they were finished with it. I guess that's my bottom line. But I would say that most are extremely well made.
Okay, and we'll get over here to some regulation questions and
Sure.
how that would be inspected. Why wasn't groundwater quantity referred to in the water stressed areas discussed? Which would be, why didn't you discuss groundwater quantity
Okay, fair enough.
in water stressed areas?
In water stressed areas, this is one of the things that got us working with the salt water. Because, okay, if you look at the 2010 drought and look at the allocation of water used during that period of time, the oil and gas industry was using less than 1.7%, which sounds very, very low, until you get into areas that didn't have that 1.7% to spare. Then you had a problem. Those are the areas in which we started using more and more salt water. And that, I think, is the way out of there. We've still got companies out there still pulling fresh water out. In some areas, they've got plenty of fresh water. They could do that. I'd still rather use surface water. I'd still rather use salt water. But one of the things we have to look at is we're competing for water with municipalities and with agriculture. We won't win that battle. Gives us a really big black eye if we make somebody's water well go dry. So we need to push that. And yeah, water stressed area is very, very important to us.
You've spoken a little bit about this already, but how is the industry progressing on reusing fracking fluids?
The water that comes back, as I mentioned there, what comes back after, and I've done quite a bit of research on what is absorbed in the rock, how quick it comes back. and what never comes back. The main thing that's coming back is this polyacrylamide polymer that's used as a friction reducer. What we've done, two approaches on that. We got to that point and we said, you know guys, there's a way to cut down the volume of this. We did that. And then we looked at it and said, you know, it costs us so much to actually get that stuff out of there to where we can reuse it, that the first few days of operation, when a lot of that is coming back, that goes to a disposal well, and then after that, we're getting a little bit cleaner salt water. That's what we can use for recycling for fracture fluids. And like I say, in our operations in West Texas, it's 40% to 100%, and the reason why we're not using more, we can't get enough salt water in those areas.
This duplicates this in some ways, but what do you do with the water in the ground and the chemicals? How do you extract those or store them?
The chemicals themselves don't come back up. Any surface active agent, this is I'll use a chemical term, this is an area to volume ratio in this rock. It has huge area in the porosity of this rock. You get the chemicals in there, they absorb onto that site, and it's bound. And it will hold it. That shale has been holding water for millions of years. Those chemicals aren't going anywhere. Now, once it gets to the surface, and we want to keep salt water, we like to use the big above-ground swimming pools. Now, obviously, not the ones with the diving boards. But you've got these big pools that will hold 40,000 barrels of water, say 160,000 gallons, you know, and there's been more. There's been up to 1 million gallons stored in these things. 2 layers of 36 mil. Your trash bags are 1 mil typically. Your heavy trash bags are 3 mil. 2 layers of 36 mil. Underneath, one of them leaks, you're going to see it at the edges. All right? That's what we stored in. Net over the top. You don't store them in earthen pits anymore. That was done years ago.
Do most wells produce more water than they use in the frac jobs? I'm not certain if that refers to what you were talking about with the combustion products. But
No. What that says is, I put 5 million gallons down over the life of the well. How much am I going to get back? You'll get back, depending on your shale, between 5% and 50% of your frac fluid. That falls off, and over the life of the well, there's some shales that do not produce 1 barrel of water a day. There's others that produce maybe 5 to 10. So you may get back as much total water as you put in there. Most of the time in shale, you do not.
do you ever stack frac wells? If so, how does that decrease risk?
We have just moving into the era of evaluating stack wells. They've been doing it for about 15 years in the Barnett oil window, which is 700 feet thick. They tried one well, they couldn't get a frac to go to the top of the shale. And so they put them in one near the top, one near the bottom, one near the top, kind of like a W pattern. And those are stacked. Works pretty well, but it's expensive to drill. So once again, we're looking for where's the best area to drill, because the areas that are marginal, we just as soon stay out of.
The Pavilion case. Whoops. Okay. In the EPA draft report on Pavilion, Wyoming, the conclusion was that the groundwater was contaminated by hydraulic fracturing fluids due to insufficient surface casing. What is your assessment of this conclusion in terms of the likelihood of barriers such as casing failing?
Okay, the Pavilion well number one was so shallow that it had fresh water, and for the life of me, I can't figure out why they were fracturing in this thing. But it was too shallow to be fracturing in, but EPA jumped the gun. They thought they had the smoking gun to say that, hey, you are polluting a water well. The problem was, and I sat in on quite a bit of the discussions, and there were a lot of us sitting in on these discussions. Two of the chemicals that EPA said they found that were evidence of well drilling or fracturing activities had never been used by the operator in those fracs, but it had been used by the EPA in their drilling. When they went back and looked, EPA had not flushed out their casing before they started taking samples. So whether or not there was a problem in Pavilion is probably not going to be known for a long time, simply because the well that was drilled and the way the EPA's contractor went about it left so many problematic loopholes open that it's hard to tell what happened there. So they jumped in, thought they had it, they backed up, and I don't know if we'll ever have an answer out of that. But it was pretty squirrely. I wouldn't have fracked the well.
I just almost duplicated questions here. How long will the cement and casings last in a well after it has been produced, plugged, and abandoned? And for a well drilled to good standards, what is the likelihood of failure after 10, 20, et cetera, years?
We have been evaluating wells. Stephen Baku had just finished up a 316,000 well study looking at areas that they could, this is Watson and Baku is the paper, looking at areas where they could store carbon dioxide sequestration. All right, and he found some wells that held up very well. There was another paper that held 40, 50-year-old wells with good cement in them. We have some wells in Texas and Oklahoma that are 100 years old and they're still capable of producing. And those wells, along with the wells that were plugged and abandoned, you will find one that leaks every once in a while and you got to go out and fix it. But most of the wells we have seen have not really created much of a problem. Now, the reason I can't tell you anymore is that's the subject of my next paper that I'm going to do in the wintertime, is I'm going to look at the environmental risk of flood and abandonment. Don't have a date yet.
How well do we really know what methane emissions are caused by gas drilling? Who has our best estimates of gas emissions? There was that one question about that, which you said you would.
Right. And basically, what we're seeing here is the University of Texas just finished a very large assessment of methane being leaked from wells during the drilling, the completion, the operations, all of the production stages. And they are the only ones that actually got out into the field and measured this. Now, there's been 5 papers on it. One national lab, Carnegie Mellon, MIT, and of course the ones by Duke. And then the ones, that's on the water samples by Duke, the ones by Cornell. The problem with those, none of those areas ever actually got out into the field and did measurements on site. University of Texas, along with the Environmental Defense Fund, did that. And they did over 130 wells. The methane leakage is less than 1%. So that's a piece of data. I'd like to see more, but that's the only real piece of well data that we have. And it basically says it's very low. But what they did find on the flip side of that is they said these pneumatic devices that they've got for various controls that were being pressured with natural gas, those were venting. And they said that needs to be cut out. You need to do that with air, compressed air. Okay, that's a change to make, but it's something we really didn't know the risk of until you do some measurements. Yeah.
How long does it take for a new technology to be fully implemented across the industry? How much does this vary by state?
Wow. New technology comes into the oil industry on a 7-year cycle. It comes in, it fails, it gets forgotten, then you get a new crop of people that comes in, and it literally is like a sine wave going through here until finally somebody makes it work. And horizontal wells, fracturing to an extent, all of these things have been tried and failed and finally made it. So I would say that in today's world it's a little faster on the uptake of technology, but you're still looking at 2 to 3, maybe 5 years for a technology to get a foothold. Now, to spread through the industry, that will depend on how much of a salesman that person that's moving the technology is. So there's still some of that out there. There's some good scientists in the industry. They do help to spread it, but it's not quick.
Okay, we're moving now largely to regulation for the last few questions here. Okay, here, if the fracking, and also industry performance within that, if the fracking process is so safe, why has industry been so secretive about alleged contamination? E.g., lawsuits by landowners have been settled out of court and kept strictly confidential. Why is that?
All right. Basically, a lot of these are nuisance lawsuits, and companies will settle them rather than go to court. And if you've ever been around a lawyer in one of these things, they are going to put a non-disclosure tab on the end of that thing. And the ones that are for real, the suits where, yeah, we got salt water in a well, something like that. Every one of those is going to have, at the end of it, as part of the settlement, they're going to say, nope, you can't talk about that. And that is just the way the legal profession in this country does it. Now, in terms of being secretive about fracturing, there have been almost 20,000 papers written about fracturing in the technical literature. Have we been secretive about it? No. But most engineers write and speak in third-person boring. You've listened to them. I mean, how many of you went to sleep in Chemistry 101? Yeah. But the issue there is, as you go through this thing, we have not communicated well with communities at all. We come in, we drill, we try to keep it low profile as possible, and we're gone. And basically, what we should have been doing all along, we're trying to do it now, is to get out to the universities, to the schools, to the public gatherings, put the issues out there, and be honest about it. Don't get up in front of a crowd and say, we've never made a mistake. Sorry, that doesn't play. I'd be getting a lot of snorts and guffaws right now if I said that probably. Okay? So it's our fault that we didn't communicate any better. Now we're paying for it.
I'm going to push you a little bit harder on that, though, because I can't think how you would know what the terms of secret settlements would be. So for you to say that those were nuisance cases and that the...
Some of them I know were nuisance statements because I got involved in them.
But since they are, in fact, since the result is that the agreement is told not to speak of it as part of the settlement, how would we know whether those are nuisance cases or not nuisance cases, or whether something of consequence
You
was
just have to
discovered?
change the law to say that that's not something you can do. But when the landowner signs that, that's part of the agreement. I can't defend it. I'd like to know about some of them too. I'd like to go back and look and see how many of them really are nuisances and how many of them are real. But all the litigation that we have in the world today, and like I say, I've been in this for a long time, it does have an impact on us. And we are trying our dead level best to do it right. You still got to make money. You still got to watch your economics. But nobody wants a spill. Because BP found out what that is not really a cheap way out. And they had to settle literally hundreds of suits. And I know some of those, know the details behind some of those, but basically there's some that are, are needed. There's some that are probably frivolous. But as far as not being able to get the data, not a single thing we can do about it.
And I think the question asker about the refusal to disclose, I think that was probably aimed at the keeping the contents of fracking fluids or some contents secret, proprietary secrets. I think it was probably about that, and that's not, I won't dispute that people can be very boring communicators, but I think it's really more about
Okay, on the frac fluid identification, that is what kicked this whole thing off. I guarantee you, as an industry, if we could go back, we would hold the service vendors' feet to the fire until they identified the chemicals. Because a lot of times we didn't know what they were doing. That's why Apache went to that list. This is the list of chemicals we won't pump. You can download that right from their website. Now, we don't know the identity of those chemicals because if they're truly proprietary, they're not going to tell us either. But we're going to make sure that there's nothing in there that's going to come back to haunt us later on. And we're looking at individual chemicals. We're also looking at mixes of chemicals.
Okay. What is a safe distance for a well to be away from a home in the event of a loss of well control?
I would say that, was it your home or my home?
Yours.
Probably, I would say that, we're getting into an era that, give me about 2-3 football fields and you'd be safe from any of the, if it caught on fire, but the wind direction is your real key behind any gas that's coming on. Fortunately, we haven't had a lot of those lately, and we've been taking a lot of care not to have a lot of those, but safe distance, that's going to depend on the well. Is it H2S? Is it high pressure? Is it just oil and no gas? What kind of a well is it? But under the most dangerous conditions, like an H2S well, I would say, a long ways. And what's a long way? I'd have to see where the wind direction was. If it was upwind of me, it had to be a long, long ways. Downwind of me, I'm not so worried about it, but if I have a neighbor on the other side, they've got a problem. So it's just something that you have to know what the hazard is, and you need to rank it. I can't give you a clean answer.
Most of the political and social and grassroots uprisings have to do with fracking close to residential areas. What can industry do to establish joint agreements with state legislators and laws to establish a reasonable compromise that protects living environments while enabling the gas independence from foreign oil we seek to power our needs until renewable alternatives become economically feasible?
Well, what you'd like to say is don't drill in the urban areas, but the way the country is being urbanized and settled, you're going to be close to somebody. Now, when you lease, and this is, to me, I hated to see when mineral rights were separated from surface rights, because I think they belong together, and that gives you, the landowner, a lot more control about where that well is going to be drilled. Now, in terms of the rest of that, it's a tough deal. But I don't know exactly, again, in terms of regulations, how to handle that, but you have to get to the community. Going to the legislature, yeah, they might give you one thing, but unless you're willing to go out to the communities and put on the presentations and not only tell them what you want to do, listen to what they're saying. If you'll do that, I think you'll have a lot better acceptance. Now, in Apache, I was looking the other day because I was anticipating that question. I can't find where we've drilled in the city limits of any substantial city. We normally stay out. We're in West Texas and Oklahoma, Texas Panhandle, etc. So we haven't had that trouble. But other companies, they've drilled right into, Fort Worth, for example. There's wells all over. It's a great source of money for the city. And is it a danger? Well, haven't had any accidents there yet that I know of. But at the same time, would I want one right next to my house? Not particularly.
Okay, the last few ones here. On a scale of 1 to 50, with 50 the highest, how would you rate the strength of Colorado's oil and gas regulations?
Wow. Again, most of the states west of the Mississippi, I would rate, and now I'm talking about Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Colorado, Kansas, and Wyoming. In the last several years, I'd probably put them in the mid-40s in terms of having good, effective regulations. And they have had for some years, but I noticed that all of those states have gone through it again. And Colorado kind of led the way in terms of water testing. Texas has led the way in terms of reporting and waste handling, etc. Every state has had some good laws, but there's an organization called Stronger. It's an acronym. And it's individuals from every state. If, say, Arkansas, when they wanted to update their laws, you've got people from the regulatory bodies of 4 or 5 states came in there and went through their laws with a fine-tooth comb and say, you're lax here, you're lax here, you're lax here. These need to be rewritten. And so a lot of the states have very similar laws from this Stronger influence that we have going on. So I would say most of them are in the mid-40s. They're good right now.
Right, and that will get to enforcement in just one more question, and then that will be the end. So, do any states require monitoring well installation and well sampling? Excuse me. Do any states require monitoring wells and sampling oil and gas sites? Should they?
Water wells?
Well installation and sampling. Sorry, mine's moved to here. Should there be monitoring, should states require the monitoring of well installation and sampling of water, I guess, before development?
Okay, let
Yes.
me approach it a couple of different ways. Yes, there's several states that are requiring water wells to be sampled. Texas has got a new rule coming through, several other states already require. As far as oil and gas wells, you're talking about wellbore integrity tests on injection wells. Those have to be done on a regular basis. And if you're talking about gas and oil wells, there are other types of testing that has to be done. And if you suspect a leak, you're on the hook to fix that well. So I'm not sure exactly how the regulations read, but yes, I think almost every state west of the Mississippi has a pretty active requirement, or the requirement is trying to make its way through the regulations to test water wells. Almost all of them have a injection well test, because that's a class 2 well that has to be tested on a regular basis. And as far as the oil and gas wells, they still have to do pressure testing.
Okay, now to enforcement. All those nice regulations and laws. What is actually happening with them? If a lack of regulatory manpower and oversight is the greatest issue regarding oil and gas drilling pollution, is there willingness in the industry to pay for those regulators to offset the bad press, bad actors?
Well, we do pay for a lot of that in terms of the fees. The fees for these wells are constantly going up. So I think that on your better operators, that yes, they would be willing to step up to that. There's also, that's a pass-along cost, though, to wherever they can, of course. That does affect their economics. But if this is done effectively, particularly in a state with a lot of oil and gas wells, companies have come forward repeatedly, and this was one of the messages that I was instructed to get across when I was testifying before the Texas Working Committee, the legislature, is that put more money into the regulatory, get more regulators out there. What we want is an even playing field. We want the cowboys gone, because we're trying to do a good job. But some of the others, not so good. So those are some areas we need. But I would say that nobody wants to pay any more taxes, but when it comes right down to it, basically the regulators are needed to make sure it's an even playing field.
Okay, last one, can you please comment on whether you believe improvements in environmental impacts have been primarily driven by improvements in technology and activities within the industry, or by regulations?
All of the above. Most of it has been, well, and I'll throw the other one out there. Public sentiment has probably driven more changes in terms of how we communicate, and several changes in how we take care of wells. We want to make sure we do this. Probably the biggest driver of all was what happened to BP and Makata. Everybody is just nervous that